writing this Hesped has proven to be extremely challenging. Often there can be a singular theme, story, trait, or issue that one may choose to focus on with regards to the person who has passed away. But asking myself the question of who was Shalom Schotten and what did he represent yields no straightforward answer. I have known Shalom my entire life. Straight after his Lavoya, I in fact rushed home to find the photos of him attending my Pidyon Haben. He was one of my oldest and dearest friends. In fact, Shalom and Pat were some of the first friends my parents made when they joined Shomrei Hadath. I sat a couple of seats away from him in shul for decades, and most of my early memories of Shomrei are of his enthusiasm at seeing me every week, or of him and Nathan Bruckheimer's juvenile efforts to wind each other up during the lull in the Haftarah, usually via the old indirect tap on the shoulder, turning away. That was That was Shalom's favourite. Despite the wealth of memories, giving a short hesped in an attempt to distillate who Shalom was is no easy task. That is, if anything, the point I can attempt to make. For a man of such complexity, richness of personality, intellectual gravitas, and overwhelming kindness, the best we can do is admire the tremendous breadth of Shalom's character. This is rooted in Shalom's remarkably meandering tapestry of a life. Almost like a character out of a Stefan Zweig novella, Shalom's appreciation of culture, his deep Yiddishkeit, his secular knowledge, his classy charm, and smooth conversational grasp made him stand out as a figure from the vanished world of European Jewry. He originally hailed from the Austrian town of Mattersdorf. And in fact, when I went to Yad Vashem a few years ago, they have the valley in Yad Vashem where they've carved in the names of the old European towns. And I remember emailing Shalom with a picture of Mattersdorf, which he greatly appreciated. And his life saw him flee the Nazis through Western Europe, and as one of the few surviving members of his family, go on to lead a remarkable, multifaceted life that encompassed a host of countries, yeshivas, publishers, friends, languages, and cultural pursuits. I know this because I was lucky enough to interview him as part of the Shomrei Voices project a few years ago. One of the enduring memories of that encounter was towards the end of the interview, drumroll, when he showed me a small photo of the class of the Ponevezh Yeshiva from, I believe, 1949, where he was one of the students. Typically now billed as the most prestigious yeshiva in the world, Shalom was there when the fledgling yeshiva first moved to the newly created state of Israel. For many of us, Shalom was that link to a lost world, and thankfully so many of us were able to grasp onto him and appreciate his life. As I have alluded to above, Shalom's old European background and his subsequently diverse life made him a true polymath. Just going through our email correspondence, you'll find references to Bach, the Danish National Orchestra, Albert Camus, and the French painter Georges Rouault. That was just literally the last two emails I saw from him. Every time I went to visit him for coffee, he'd be listening to classical music and be reading some highly obscure book on French Impressionism. You know those people you encounter, where at the end of the conversation with them you think, wow, I really know nothing about the world in which we inhabit. Shalom was that person. But here's the rub. The underpinning of it all, the bedrock of all his intellectual and spiritual energy, was Judaism and the Torah. This is where that old school European outlook really comes into play, that essential marriage between Shalom's worldliness and its impact on his own spirituality. That's the core. His emails would cover the interplay between Georges Rouault and Chad Gadya, Johann Sebastian Bach and the sublime nature of Jewish liturgy, or Albert Camus' linguistics and the contrast with the Gemara. No wonder Shalom also enjoyed reading Rabbi Sachs so much, who I think also has a particular skill at doing that. What is most noteworthy is that his brand of Judaism wasn't just confined to high intellectual understandings of the Torah. He was a true embodiment of that key passage from Tehillim of Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve Hashem with joy. Whenever I met him, he would always put the Bach on pause and exclaim with real enthusiasm how he'd found a small but powerful insight into some passage from the weekly parsha or from a prayer that we read. Meanwhile, over Pesach, the point that kept returning to him was the nature of the questions. How do we ask them? How many questions do we ask? How do we deal with the complexity of the Haggadah? Despite his immense knowledge and decades of accumulated wisdom, Shalom would often return to those fundamental points of Jewish life with a genuine sense of joy and curiosity. No wonder, even when his eyesight was beyond the point of reading printed text, he still led the Shacharit service each week at shul with unfailing kavanah and gladness. I'll end this hesped by looking back on a conversation I had with my dad a few years ago when I just returned from meeting Shalom for coffee. I remember telling my dad how frustrated I was that not enough people understood how much of an intellectual heavyweight Shalom was, and they merely viewed him as the kind old friendly man from shul. Whilst this thought still crosses my mind, I counter this with the fact that Shalom was a man of such amazing kindness and humility and that I imagine he had very little interest in gratuitously forcing his brain power on everyone. At the heart of it, Shalom was characterized by his kindness and friendliness. Having lived through the Holocaust, when anti-Semitism, hatred, and prejudice reached their horrifying peak, Shalom dedicated himself to treating every Jew, and indeed every person he encountered, with love and warmth. Whenever we spoke, he abhorred not only anti-Semitism, but most importantly, he decried the amount of petty hatred that exists within our community. Whenever someone walked through the doors of Shomrei, no matter who they were, what their affiliation was, their backstory, or their views, Shalom would wish them Shabbat Shalom and give a gentle, reassuring smile. I remember when I was a young child and then my cousins from Belgium came to Shomrei. They were not particularly frum and felt rather awkward in the alien Orthodox service, until I noticed they were speaking comfortably with someone in fluent French and smiling. Shalom had walked over and was trying to explain the service to them. Whenever I saw Shalom, he would always thank me for visiting, as if I were doing him a favour. He was too humble to understand how much I enjoyed our visits and how much of a favour he was doing me by hosting me, and how much he meant to me as a friend. The phrase I mentioned above, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, a phrase which really characterises Shalom, comes from a section of Tehillim which has been attributed to Moshe Rabbeinu. It is so fitting that in one of our final email exchanges, Shalom mentioned Moshe Rabbeinu, and Shalom quoted the passage in Devarim, Lamed Daled, Pasuk Vav, which states that nobody knew where Moshe was buried, i.e., his physical legacy had completely gone. But to quote Shalom, whilst his physical presence was now hidden, his spiritual contribution should be celebrated. The same can now be said for Shalom, and I hope we can be zocher to take on his legacy of joy in Judaism, kindness, and intellectual stature. Thank you very much.